started putting my closing on before I got to the end. Okay, so today I wanted to talk about, if you want to put it, for the medieval idea of the Roman Catholic Church, this is the beginning of the end. The Roman Catholic Church that we have today is not the Roman Catholic Church of the medieval church, and it is not the church of the ancient church. They are different. They have different, and we've kind of gone through some of the ideas. And the medieval church was a experiment. How does the world work, or how should it look if we are all Christians and this is how we have to live? That's kind of what happened. People don't question, or didn't question, the reality that God is in charge. He has given, his Son has come to take away sins, and now he has left the church to govern this world spiritually. And he has sent kings to bring about, to make peace and bring order, that they will then allow the gospel to go forward so people can live the Christian life. That is what was known. Nobody questioned this. There had been, if you go back through all the things we've talked about, there were forgeries, but the majority of people didn't know that. We're not at the point in history where people began to point out all the forgeries of the Constantine document, or Constantine donation, and the idea that Constantine gave the West to the Roman Church and said they could just run it. That hasn't been exposed yet. The way the Roman Catholic Church, they saw themselves as the most pure church in the world, and that they were given the horrible weight of being the pure church that has to go out. And they were Peter's successors. Now, as much as we like to go back and say, oh, look, they call themselves Peter's successors, there was the weight of it. They had to be the pure church in some ways. But that was really beginning to wane by the time you get to the Crusades in the 1100s, the 1200s, and now into the period we're getting into. It has become a business of the running of the world. And one of the corruption, when you look at, I spent a lot of time this week studying what was the corruption of the church in this time period. And I wasn't finding all those things. Oh, all these people having, sexual problems, and all these people having, that was not what people were pointing out as the corruption of this period. It was, nepotism. A person became a cardinal because they were the son of so-and-so. They got the position because their family had lots of money. They were part of a coalition of people, and there were factions within the Roman Catholic Church that were very much so like the mob. And they put their people in charge so that they would get the kickbacks on whatever favors that they could get from the church. And so there was this organization, and so it's just started running. You've got this theological group that's coming up with ideas, and they're pulling in the Roman culture, not Christian culture, but they're pulling the Roman culture in, especially in the idea of Mary worship that came in at this point. And we kind of went through, a lot of that was Roman. Those concepts of the family. You can't go to the top member of the Godfather, if you want to put it that way. You go to the mother. You go to someone else, and they will be your direction into the community. That was very much a Roman culture concept that grew. Mary worship began in Rome, and it kind of stayed there and spread out a bit, but it focused there very much so. It was not something that was pushed everywhere else, but it became very pushed by the time we have the Fourth Lateran Council, which was a rubber-stamped document where the church began to rubber stamp doctrines of faith. And there was this almost a lockstep of everyone in the church had to be Roman. Roman, not just in their thinking, but their actions. If you question what the church does, it's your sin. The monks precipitated in all these little groups while they would have disagreements around. There was a lockstep. You do what this is because this is what God has commanded. You obey this way. If you question the rule of God's faith, then it is your sin nature and your rebellion that needs to be dealt with. And so they created this perfect storm of nobody questioning what's being taught. Now, I don't want to say everybody in the medieval period they were all heretics, because I do think God will save those whom he will save, but they were saved at this period despite what they were being taught, not because of what they were being taught. This is kind of a dark point. And I show this because this is actually in Avignon, and we'll go over that in just a moment here. Okay, so there was a concept, an idea that we talked about a long time ago. If we go back almost a year, I think it is, I talked about totus Christus. And it's an idea that was taught and was believed in the medieval church. And it basically is, what is the church? The church being Christ's ministry on earth, the total Christ. Christ is in heaven, but there is a part in the there's a part of the church which is us. It's working now? Should. Okay. The total Christ, and this is the head, which would be the organization. This is the way I believe Augustine, when he came up with this idea in order to talk against the Donatists who were saying that there shouldn't be, or that only their church was the good one, and it wasn't whether or not you're part of the church, it was their church as compared to other churches, and they were schismatic. Or the Pelagians who said, well, there was they were denying original sin, and all these issues. And this is who Augustine was talking against when he came up with this idea that's saying that it is Christ and his people in the organization that he has created, the church. And there is a certain organization, a skeleton to the flesh, but it is still people. And if we look at some of his quotes, he says, the whole Christ is head and body. And I think he thought of it as the head being Christ and the body being the believers. And then he said, the church is the body of Christ, where the head and members form one whole, not divided by the sins of individuals. So there's this organism of the church that was then would do the ministry of God. But as the ministry and the organization over the next 1,000 years turned this organism into an actual institution, and the institution was now forming and creating canon law and order, and it maintained by default its own system. It's no longer the ministry, it has become the program, to use the pastoral or language they used to say in the past. He also says, Christ loves the church as his body, and we are saved as members of him who is our head. And so you see, he makes that distinction. This is Augustine. And the church used this, and they went with this idea that the church is people and institution, the body being all the members, Christ being the head. But there was kind of a change began to come through, and the Roman Catholic and the pontificate began to see themselves as the head, the vicar of Christ. It began coming in more and more. They began to gain more and more power. So by about the 1200s, there was one ruler of Western world. It was the Pope. All the other leaders were expected to give in. They made all the rulers of the world basically bow to their power. If a leader had problem with them, they would excommunicate them, their people would overthrow them. They had absolute power, these popes. They had done this now for 1,000 years. And so they had gotten used to it, and they began to build their own kind of insular power base. Until in the early 1300s, I think it's 1302, then we have the Unum Sanctum, the declaration from the Pope to, was it Charles of France? I can't remember. But anyways, there's a declaration where he declares, Pope Boniface VIII, 1302, that gave extreme authority to the papal office. And he began telling people, I declare that I am in charge. Every emperor, every king, every warlord is subservient to me. Stated that salvation apart from the Roman Catholic Church is not possible, and that all life must submit to its spiritual head, which is himself. He has complete authority, the complete kingmaker, and the spiritual control of the soul. This, if you want to put it, is the arrogant high point of the Roman Catholic Church. One thing you find when I read the Old Testament, I read that God does not, when a person makes statements of pride, what comes right after the statement of pride? A fall. And that's very much what's going to happen here. God raises up sometimes great heroes, sometimes he brings up anti-heroes. And I do believe that God, remember, there's nothing that happens outside of God's sovereignty. And so a bunch of stuff is going to happen really rapidly to the Roman Catholic Church that they could not foresee. It was so far beyond their comprehension. You see what I mean? So here you got Christ as the head of the church. They began to put themselves in position of Christ. Is that not a form of idolatry? Yeah.
I'm sorry, can you just tell me what year, kind of approximately what year we are?
This is 1302.
Just so I can kind of...
Yeah, we're going to be talking about 1302 to the beginning of 1400.
Okay, thank you.
Well, when a person comes in and they say, I just love this term, that's why I put this theological term in there. When a person starts seeing that, the idea of Christ as the head and this perfectly working organism that is now the church, and it's running as an institution, the fact that it runs perfect, we would call that an over-realized eschatology. They have foreseen that which is in heaven, and they're saying it should be here. And so they made themselves the head, the Christ, and his body on earth, and said, this is it. They're saying heaven was now on earth, which was not the case. And then we have this group. You see, there's this force that's going to form, that's going to start up all of a sudden. And when something happens suddenly in the world, it's because, I say it's because God is bringing it about, a change that he has already gathered together. All the people everywhere, they're all starting to line up, and nobody sees it yet. And all of a sudden, there's going to be a hurricane of voices. But right now, there's no voices. But this little voice began talking in France, at the University of Paris. Little discussion by some scholars saying, wait, isn't the body of Christ supposed to be the people and the councils and the people, not the Pope himself, but shouldn't be just this? And it was stuffed down and told to be quiet. But in France, they started talking at the university. And that's what the conciliarists, people who said the church is the councils and the order and the people, it's not just the head. And they began asking the question, who is the church? Not what is the church as an institution. This is considered one of those great proto-Reformation changes in thinking. And it was very small and quiet. And every topic that I talk about in this, people have gone off in directions, and you could find great depths of study. Conciliarism and all the people involved in the University of Paris, all this, you could get lost in the studies here. So I'm going to go quick over some of this stuff. He says, the church and the mystical body of Christ possesses authority in its entirety, which is expressed through the council, not solely through the head. This is kind of that little small voice. And we're talking about, at this moment, maybe a handful of people that are talking like this. And they're considered heretics, basically. They're talking down the Pope. Now, this is, starting from the other side, we've talked a lot about the Eastern influence and the Eastern, but now we're going to talk about the physical organization of the Roman Catholic Church. Back in 754 and 756, the Lombards, a people from the northern Italy, were taking over Italy again, and the Byzantines could no longer fight them back. The Eastern Roman Empire could no longer fight them back. And they were losing ground, and they thought they were going to fall to these barbarians from the north, and the church was going to be threatened. So they went to King Pepin of France, or that area, it wasn't France, and said, we will make you king if you do some things. We will anoint you as king, a Christian king and all that stuff, if you defend Rome, push back the Lombards. And so he gave 2 donations. And this is not a forgery. This is real. This is the area around Rome and about 3 states around it. These are known as, the papal lands. The word just dropped as I said it. They were a kingdom. Now the church are really, really bad at running things like that. The church is not a physical kingdom where they can deal with stuff, so they divided it up into provinces. Each one was kind of run a little different. Some ways were kind of loosely organized as a kingdom, a theocratic kingdom. They ruled from the 800s till about, well, actually they lost the lands in 1870, I think it is. These lands around Rome, eventually being taken by Italy. These lands were run by families that were kind of given regions, and they kind of took over. They ran like the mob. They did what they wanted. They ran the area, and because they didn't have a strong military, they didn't, because nobody would mess with the Pope's power. And so they kind of had a little small army, but yet they were always getting messed in world politics. The church was getting involved. In fact, at this time, when we were going to, in the 1300s, they were at war with Sicily. And they lost a war with Sicily. The Pope was at war with somebody. But it was a nation. And that is only because they wanted to set their person up on the throne there, and someone else was going to go in, and they said, well, that land was given, so we should defend it. They were getting involved in earthly wars, they were making earthly taxes, and they were setting up a kingdom. Can you not see that this is about to go really bad? This is Pepin. Well, in these papal states, there were rival families that were always at war. And so I'm going to simplify this because there's a lot of names and stuff. You've got the Colonnas and you have the Satani. These are really powerful families. I think they are mob families. They realized that you can try to take over the papal states and get lots of money, but when you really want true power and protection, you need to influence the church. So what they started to do was buy off cardinals and leaders and people in the church and gain power by allowing them to get away with stuff in the papal lands. They had their own leaders. They had influence even up to the forming of popes, because it's all by election, right? Now, if you get enough votes, you can control stuff. The Colonnas were bloodthirsty. The Satanis, as far as I can tell, were a little bit more patient. And the Colonnas got on the bad side of the Pope because they wanted to set up their friend in Sicily, who won the war. So the Colonnas, while they had lots of power in the church, by bribing officials and kind of doing the thing that the mob would do, all behind the scenes, that they were now bad, and they were kind of at war with the Pope, but not officially, because they're just a family, just a mob group. But they're also at war with this Satani, who are really they got in the good books with the Pope and the papacy. And so they were on the good side, and they were enemies, and so they would fight in the streets. We're talking about this is like a civil war, not just families. They have influence for hundreds of years, go back into every community. And so if the Colonnas say go, 10,000 people run to the streets. And then there would be 10,000 people would go the other, and they would start a fight in the streets. That's the power that they had. They ruled because there was no other leadership. No earthly leadership in a huge one. Well, then in 1297, Stefano Colonna did the heist. You can actually look this up. They call it the heist. He stole 200,000 gold florins of the Pope's money and gave it, and took it to themselves. And this went too far. Now, just even by the amount of money we have now, 200,000 gold coins is a lot of money. Now, think of the 1300s. This was a heist. And the Pope was at the peak of his power. This was too much. So he, declared a crusade against this family. They made it illegal for the Colonnas to have any ministers in the church, excommunicated the whole church, and brought in a crusade against them, destroyed their lands, confiscated all their lands, laid siege to and destroyed their fortress, and gave all their lands to their rivals. Because again, they were on the good side, gave it all. Now, you think, if you have a mob family and you take away their home, are they defeated? No. Because their power is with people and the connections. And all their allies, they weren't defeated. So going after their lands was only the first thing. And the church was currently in this war, and they made peace in 1302. So they came in, led this crusade. All their coffers are gone because they lost this money, and now they've finally made peace, but they are weak. They've been depleted of money and resources at this point. Then something comes in. Again, you notice the name. Sciarra Colonna. Another Colonna decided with him and some other foreign agitators, got 1,400 mercenaries, and they swarmed the Pope and his house, killed everybody in it except for the Pope, locked him in a room for 3 days, and at least they yelled at him a lot, but realistically they say that there's no evidence they beat up the Pope, but they held him in a room for 3 days until the people of the town began to question, wait, isn't the Pope here? And they rose up en masse and freed the Pope. Now, you have this man. He is the most powerful man in the world. He raises kings and lowers them. He controls whether people go to heaven or hell. And they locked him in a room for 3 days. That's why it's known as the Anagni outrage. Because it is the greatest slap in the face that you could ever do to the Roman pontificate. Followed by a whole lot of rioting in the streets everywhere. The whole country was in disorder, and the Pope had been embarrassed to the greatest level. The whole organization was raging mad, and they were embarrassed. He then died a few weeks later from a stroke brought on by the stress of the event, followed by it was about 3 years, it's actually 2 years and change, where they couldn't come up with who was going to be the next pope, because all these families had bought everybody off. And so they were at a loggerheads. They couldn't determine who was going to be the next pope. They put up the smoke in the building to make the new pope for almost 3 years, because they couldn't come to an agreement, because everybody was in their factions. Then there was one guy named Celestus, I think it was the 5th. He got voted in after 3 years. He was voted in because he was a nice guy. He was really nice. He got along with everybody, extremely pious. He loved to go into his room and just pray for everybody and preach the word. And he was probably a very good guy. But he got put there in charge, and as soon as he was in charge, he realized this was a huge mistake. And he almost immediately said and tried to resign the position of Pope. He managed to allow him to resign after 2 months. And then the smoke went back up again to form a new Pope. And this time they came up with Clement V. Clement V realized that now there's 2 popes, but one is deposed, self-deposed, right? He's still a figurehead. And all the problems going on in Rome, you can't have a figurehead, because so he locks him up in prison. He was self-imposed, right? And people say it's not necessarily known if it was bad, because he was a monk who liked to suffer. That's actually what they say. He liked to sit there and have nothing in his room and just pray. So, but then he died in jail, and they don't know. Historians have debated whether or not it was malicious or not. But he died at this time, and the Colonnas and all the people with them kind of rallied around Celestus. Clement came in and said, okay, I got to make peace. I got to work this out. So now there is constant turmoil taking place in Rome and Italy. Riots in the streets all the time. And he says, we got to make a change. And then France comes up and says, you know what? We're safe. Come to us. Until things calm down a bit, let's move on to Avignon. So after a couple of years, he gets up and he moves over to France. And this is what they call the Babylonian Captivity, because the people in Rome hated this idea. Just think of all the factions. They lost all their power instantly. All their money, all their scheming, everything was taken away. It turned into just so he moved to Avignon to avoid the simony and nepotism. Simony is the buying of offices, and nepotism is giving them to people who are your family members. And so he avoided, because they were so corrupt, and he knew it. But as soon as he left, immediately, all of a sudden, you got these,
Avignon, where is that? Is that in France? Where is that?
Avignon is in France, yep.
Okay.
I believe at this time it was actually just a small village, because they eventually buy it. The papacy buys the whole village and stuff like that. That's going to come up. So he's thinking temporary at this point. So the Babylonian captivity, as soon as they get there, they are accused from Rome as being the most corrupt people, and they should get right back to Rome. Because this is where the sweet spot is. You're the Roman church, and you're not in Rome. Just think about it. The Roman church is not in Rome. You're the French church now. How can you call yourself Peter's successor when you're not at the church of Peter? Now, this is a real problem. And they start saying, all you're doing is simony and nepotism, the same things that they are accused of, and he has to run, is happening there in Avignon. And you know what? It was. All history says that the church was so corrupt, as soon as it got into France, instead of it being Roman people buying and selling, the French started doing it. And they got all their people in control. And, well, they didn't have a place for all the cardinals and all their staff and everything to run the world from, so they had to build a place which was called the Palais des Papes, or probably the Palace of the Popes. And the thing is, when they built this palace, I think I have it right there, was right when plagues were going through, the Black Death. And so Rome loved to rub it in your face. Look, you're building this palace while everyone's dying around you. Why don't you give that money to the poor? You know, the old argument is always used. So they built this palace, which was just a functional government building. Yeah, probably you would pull in resources to build a new palace. And eventually they're going to stay and they're going to buy the whole area, because they just get bigger and bigger. But you notice then the people in France start saying, well, we left because you guys have simony, nepotism, but indulgences. They actually accuse them right back, saying that's why we're in France. Because you're bad. So they're both accusing each other of the exact same things. And they were corrupt. And it's kind of silly because they're you can just see where this is going. So I have this map, and I know I got the AI to do it, so it's kind of messed up. But they went to Avignon on the left here. So Clement of the Fifth came, and he set up there, and he stayed for a while. So you've got John and Benedict and Innocent and Urbain and Gregory. And so Gregory the 11th, he, after all these years of being in France, we're talking about 76 years. Yeah.
So there's no real official church leadership in Rome when they're all in France?
Yes. They just got up and moved away. And because the country was in turmoil and not recovering. In fact, it never really, you'll see, it doesn't get better. But so Gregory the 11th, he says, enough of this. He gets up and he moves back to Rome. Well, the thing is that Gregory the 11th doesn't live very long once he gets back in Rome. He just dies naturally, being an old man. So they have another pope, that they have a new election, and you have Boniface the 9th. You'll find that most of the villains in this story are going to be called Boniface. I just noticed it. They all have the name Boniface. Boniface the 9th gets elected. But as they're electing him, there's riots in the streets, and the rioters are screaming, "Give us a Roman pope, if not Roman, Italian," and chanting it and threatening to destroy the city unless they get a Roman pope. So do you think they're going to choose a French or maybe a Swiss or a Polish leader at this point? No, they're going to get a Roman. And guess who Boniface is? He is a Roman person who is also from the Satani. He's part of that group who has always been benefited. And when he gets in power, he doesn't say, okay, we need to heal the wounds. He starts alienating anybody who was French, alienating anybody who isn't Roman. He starts collecting cardinals who disagree with him and imprisoning them. And he, on record, tortures at least 6 of them. And he starts creating this, trying to rule a dissenting group of cardinals in trying to make power by using extreme force and tyranny. This does not go over well, and all those who disagree with him go back to Avignon and they form a new pope. So now you have two popes. This starts creating a huge issue. You've got this Avignon on the left. Now you've got in red Rome and Avignon, with Pope Urbain in France, and now there is Boniface again. He's still there in Rome. And you notice that there's a number of popes under them. So at this point, you've got two leaderships. Now, both of them go out and excommunicate each other. They both go out and excommunicate every king and leader who sides with the other one. So if you're in France, you've been excommunicated by Rome. Or if you're in Rome, so now who has the authority of the keys of heaven? Who actually, and people begin to question now and think. And that university at France, which were there and they were talking, it begins to build. And all of a sudden it gets really loud. And the Pope in Avignon goes, whoa, this is getting really loud. These people are starting to, the conciliarists are starting to talk. And he goes to the king of France and says, shut these guys up. And so he goes in there and tells the university professors to stop talking about theological things like conciliarism, the authority of the throne, who has opens and closes the salvation, and all that stuff. What do you think happens when you tell a bunch of intellectuals they can't talk about something? They talk all the more, but they spread, and they start going all over the place, and every one of them starts talking, and pretty soon the whole of Europe is screaming like this massive storm of conciliarism, and it's like a tidal wave, and the popes are here. They lost all their credibility instantly when they had two popes. And all the people start screaming, and you think at this moment, we're going to lose. There's going to be an end of the papacy. And they start forming this new council. But again, it takes a while because it does have to build a little bit. So you got the two popes, and you have this thing where not just talking about change, but they call it Gallicanism from France. And what that is a French church. Well, you got the Roman church. Well, they start saying, well, is there a French church? Well, how about a Swiss church? How about a German church? How about an English church? And they start thinking about regional churches. Boom! There's another thought that people have been suppressing and not allowing to talk about. Yeah.
So this time here, we're at 13.
Yeah, this is an early third. Well, yeah. Now we're getting into
those two popes. Those two popes at the same time were
Yep.
1378.
Yeah.
All that stuff was what. So they're fighting the two popes, the two factions fighting each other.
Yep.
What is the influence? Because the Protestant Reformation was already underway while this is going on.
No, it's not yet.
Well,
No, the ideas, the proto-Reformation ideas. That's what I'm saying. These are proto-Reformation things that are going to lead to the Reformation.
Well, a little bit start because
The ideas.
John Wycliffe, he's coined as the star of the Reformation.
Mm-hmm.
That's 1347. So it's already 30, 40 years before this. He's coined as the star of the Reformation when it happened. And then
Yep.
before that, you have, in the year 1215, you have the signing of the Magna Carta
Well, in England, huh?
in England. The person who wrote the Magna Carta, Stephen Langston, who is the foremost who put in our chapter and verse divisions in the Bible. So he was a Bible he's a Bible believing man. He's the one who wrote the Magna Carta to the landowners in England who challenged the king.
Yeah, there were ideas, there were places, but they didn't become mainstream.
They didn't become mainstream. Yeah, I agree. They're not mainstream. I'm just saying that these ideas have started in there. So what's the interesting thing is conversation is like what you were saying before, is who is the church?
Yep.
So the Pope is claiming, full authority, right? But when in history here, in church history, it's interesting to know when you challenge the authority because as we
Well, that's
understand
where we're
the
going to go.
Bible,
We're going to get up when it actually gets challenged, because they start going, you've got these local ideas. Now, Gallicanism, these are all ideas that start forming together, but they're new because people have not been allowed to think independently. If you thought for yourself, you're a heretic. Now people are thinking because whose authority is telling them they can't think about things? And they begin challenging the whole idea of this governance. And they started using this group, I like to call it the Ultramontanists, which has nothing to do with Montanism, but it just means there was this catchphrase that some people would say, I'm a Christian. Another person would say, I'm an Ultramontanist, which means the man beyond the mountains. I support the Pope in Italy. So it's either you're French or you're the Pope, the man across the Alps. So it's kind of like saying Orange Man. Everybody knows who it means. They would say Ultramontanist. And it means I support the Pope, the man beyond the Alps. And so they had their catchphrase, and they still had the two factions constantly working. So you see how things are very quickly from a heist, how fast everything is degrading into complete almost anarchy. Then, by the time you get 100 years later, 100 years, actually it's 70 years. 70 years of people questioning the authority of the popes. The conciliarists gain maximum momentum. And at this point, they come together at the Council of Constance and they create two documents. One called the Hic Sancta and the other called the Frequens. And both these documents challenge the authority of the Pope. The first is that they said the church has to meet on a regular basis so that we can determine what the church is going to believe. And it says, this is the declaration. Just think of the wording of this. I'm going to read it. It says, legitimately assembled in the Holy Spirit, constituting a general council and representing the Catholic Church militant, it has power immediately from Christ, and everyone of whatever state or dignity, even papal, is bound to obey it in these matters which pertain to the faith, the eradication of said schism, and the general reform of the said Church of God in head and members. So they claimed for themselves the power, and because they had so much power, this stuck. The church said, these guys are right. The popes need to be humbled. They need to give in. And then they have to meet regularly. That was the other one that came up. The Pope can't just not have a meeting or call a meeting for 300 years and then rubber stamp a whole bunch of doctrines like he did with the Fourth Lateran Council. There's no meetings, and all of a sudden, the seven sacraments, the worship of Mary, and all the stuff lumped in all at once. You can't do that. We have to be able to talk. So they're limiting the Pope's ability to come up with doctrines. And then this group, this is where they fell apart, is they decided to make their own Pope. Depose the other two, they're supposed to step down, and they elect Alexander V. And he goes to Pisa. So now you have 3 popes. Now, can you just imagine, the world leaders are laughing. So you have Pope Gregory the 12th, the Roman line. You've got Benedict the 13th in Avignon, and you've got Alexander the 5th in Pisa. Each one is claiming to be the true pope, and they all are excommunicating all the rest. It's all going a 3-way split. So things are just getting from bad to worse. Well, then the same consular movement said, okay, we've got to deal with this. we have popular support. So they get together again and they say, we've got to deal with this. So they pull everybody into one room and they tell all three leaders, you all need to step down. We're wrecking the church, we're wrecking the image of God. So John and Gregory either resigned or were deposed in 1415. Benedict flees. He runs away. But then they catch him a few years later, and he is deposed. And then once they depose him, because there's nobody left, they make one new one, Martin V. And that is why we have one pope today, because they made sure that all three were gone at this point. But the effects were done. The damage was done. People were now questioning, thinking. The church had fragmented into different countries. There was now a French church, an Italian church, Swiss church, English church, German church. They began to see themselves. It's kind of like the opposite of what happened during the First Great Awakening, when the Americans, you guys, no longer saw yourselves as 13 colonies, you were one nation. They actually attribute that one nation idea to the First Great Awakening, when everybody now saw themselves as Christians first, and Americans. In history books, that's one of the things I've read. This is the exact opposite. All the intellectuals that have been told this is what you must believe and teach, now are thinking. These intellectuals are the guys who are become the Renaissance leaders. The people who are going to be so tired with being told what is the truth about theology and about science and about history and everything, that they're going to go back in the Renaissance, which means back to the sources. Where did everything go wrong? And find the truth again. That's what Renaissance means. Back to the sources. Back to the Greeks. Let's go back to that which was before the whole system that was messed up. And they begin to think and undermine, and that's when they're going to find the forgeries. That's when they're going to start finding all the problems, when they start looking back, because now they're allowed to look. And everything starts collapsing inward. This whole institution, this institution of the Roman Church, is starting to cave in. Documents are questioned. Ex opere operato begins to be questioned. These are all the things that are starting in the Reformation. All the authority of the seven sacraments and the Fourth Lateran Council conclusions, everything begins to get challenged again. And people begin to think, what is the significance? This is where you start getting to the Huss and Wycliffe, and they are able to gain off of these momentums from all those people thinking. But what happens is they lose their momentum. The conciliarists are going to be gone in the next 100 years. They had full control, and within a few years, the Pope, when there was one, people said, well, we can't find a way, we don't want to fight anymore. We're tired of having multiple popes and fighting. And so they lost momentum, and everybody just wanted to have peace again. And they walked away from a lot of the things. That's what led the Reformation need to fight everything back again. Because people gave up. They saw it and they thought they had won, and they stopped fighting. But we're going to be coming into the people like Martin Luther and stuff later here. It was a movement that had huge success for about 100 years and then disappeared. A hurricane came, brought about huge changes at the right time, and then it fizzled out. And that's kind of where I wanted to stop, and just saying that this was a point in which God raised up villains. I think the Solane family were raised up to be villains, and they were judged for it. But they brought down the Roman Catholic Church. I don't think anybody in the Roman Catholic Church could have seen that coming. The corruption, maybe. I think God used these villains, right? And then it brought about a change. So I just think it's like you got the villains, you got anti-villains. And that's kind of what I see in this section. This is a horrible end to something that got lockstep, and then it started to fall. And the only thing I wanted to mention here is where it ended was in 1870, when the Papal States were finally taken away by the nation of Italy, and Pope Pius, who had been the most powerful people in the world, just a few hundred years later, just think this is 1870. This is not that long ago. He called himself the prisoner in the Vatican because all the other papal lands were taken and it was left to the Vatican City after the loss of the Papal States. It is at that point in 1870 that the Pope is going to step in and say, and create the idea of the dogma of papal infallibility. But by this point, it's a chihuahua barking.
Napoleon captured the Pope in 1809. Napoleon captured the Pope and died in jail too. So
I can see
that was another one. That was another Pope. That was another
right?
Pope captured and died in jail.
It's not the authority. They had no power by this point. When he made the statement, which I think, I see it more like a Napoleon complex here, right?
Yeah.
I'm the king of the world, but it's a little man talking. So anyways, that's where I wanted to end, is that everything was running in a certain direction, and it fell apart completely in a very short period of time, and it never recovered. And I think God's sovereignty, I think, has his fingers all over that.
So this was in 1870.
Yeah, that last one with the people.
So before this, it was unclear whether it was. So this more or less limited his inspiration, if you can say, is that because before it could be whenever he was speaking, right? But now it's limited. Just is that what it was doing?
Well, because there were so many documents where the popes would disagree, and so it would end the discussion of the lawyers who were saying that, well, what is the truth? The popes have been disagreeing with each other.
Right.
Well, no, unless you're actually speaking from a specific doctrine. Otherwise, it's just talk. It's good. It's good, but it's not a doctrine.
Does that have to be from a particular spot, like his throne, his chair, or how does the Pope determine that he's speaking ex cathedra?
When it's a papal bull, it has to be a declared statement, like when he declares it. It's not just if he speaks it like at a sermon or a speech. It has to be he writes it as a formal document and submitted, and then that will be an ex cathedra. It's more of a formal declaration.
Doesn't it, you don't have to be on the throne? Isn't it also that he sits on the throne, and when he speaks on the throne, he speaks without error? I'm just curious about that, since you mentioned it. I thought that's how it was. Okay.
You may not know this, but has any of the recent popes done this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Pope John Paul. He has made some declarations. I can't remember right off the names of them because I just remember the Latin. But there's like Lesser Gentiles, or something like that. Something to the Gentiles. It had the new position. There were a few that have come up since then, and it has to do with the how does the Roman Catholic Church understand Muslims and Buddhists and all the other religions, and are they lesser forms of light leading to Christ? That's ex cathedra, that teaching.
Was that the early 60s when they made some of those came through the process of the papal bull, and became that's
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm just saying everything's interesting because when you reach back in history, even like a Bible-believing countries like, let's say like America and other countries, like you have these struggles throughout history here because you have the Roman Catholic Church that claims all authority, and then you have people that God rose, whatever, all the way back from, it's easy, you can reach back to 1215 and then those 1303 and all these little pockets. It even happens before that, but it's easier to find those from like 1215. And that's the fact that we all, under the Protestant blanket or Bible-believing nations, people rose out of separating themselves from the Roman Church. As the Roman Church, you weren't allowed to read the Bible. You weren't allowed to print the Bible in the native tongue that you're in.
Yep.
You couldn't learn the Bible. The only that was locked up for the priest only.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just interesting. That's just the struggle to have people to bring the Bible, that for people to be able to have and read their Bible on their own anytime they want, preach out in the street and speak their mind about it, speak their opinion about it, what it says at any time, verse that it was illegal to, if you went against what the Pope said or something, a higher position in the church, you would lose your life or, burned at stake or whatever the case may be. It's just interesting, the struggle between the two.
Even, well, speaking of that, Kenny, the Waldensians, even before Huss and Wycliffe were already fighting against the Catholics and wanting the scriptures to be taught and in the hands of the people. That was before, end of 1200s.
Yeah.
So you saw that, a lot of those pocket groups.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, it's just, I hear what you're saying, and I hear that you got a place where I just can't, it's amazing to me that it survived, the Roman Catholic Church. And to me, it just kind of seems that the natural man wants to have this form of godliness, but without the power. And so it maintained, even though it was so corrupt and it was obviously, but people still wanted it because it was this, somehow connected them to a form of godliness, but without the real power of the gospel. And it's funny how that is.
I was kind of thinking back to the times like in England you would hear all those those novels, Downton Abbey and stuff, all those kind of romance. They always talk about even in the Anglican Church, well, so and so got his position because that duke got them. Well, that's simony. I mean, it's a sin. The church declared simony a sin back in the early church. But it was done all the time, and they never really eradicated it. I don't know if it ever has been in the Roman Catholic Church. Wherever you have appointments like that, I don't know if you ever can eliminate it because people will always manipulate the situations. All right, we've gone very long. Who would like to pray us out, or I can pray?
Sure.
Oh.
Well, Father, we just want to thank you for the opportunity that we have just to think through.